Well, guys, it's that time of year again to talk about the worst films of 2019. 2019 overall has been a pretty average year for movies. It was a lot better than 2018, but still not stellar overall. It had some great things about it with some great films, especially near the end of the year, but there was plenty of stinkers to choose from, and that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Now, just saying, I'm not that good when it comes to making a worst list. I constantly second guess myself and change my opinion on is this film worse or is it better? And overall, I am not personally happy with this list that I'm giving you guys. I think there's still some things I could work out with it, but this is what I'm thinking and feeling right now. So, with all that said, let's get started with my dishonorable mentions. And with my dishonorable mentions, we start with Replicas, followed by Playmobil the Movie, 47 Meters Down, Black Christmas, and Jexy. Congratulations to those dishonorable mentions. You did not end up on the top 10 worst for 2019, but just the fact that you were mentioned, you probably could have easily been on this list. So, I mean, it's not that great that you're on the dishonorable mentions anyway. But anyway, guys, let's get started with the real meat of this video with my top 10 worst. Now, at number 10, we have A Madea Family Funeral. Originally, when I reviewed this, I gave it a 2 out of 10, but that was back when I had never seen a Madea movie in my life. And since then, I've seen a few of them, and this is ultimately not the worst one. But it is still a bad film nonetheless, with terrible comedy. Nothing works in this film. It looks cheap, and there's just nothing about it that made this remotely entertaining. Now, I do know that this movie has an audience. There are some people that I even know that see this movie and this series as kind of guilty pleasures, which I can understand that. I have my own guilty pleasures, but this isn't one of them. I think this movie and this character could really work if just there was better writing, because I honestly don't mind this character. I just think the writing and the comedy is poorly done, and that's why it's this low on the list. At number 9, we have Arctic Dogs, the worst animated film of 2019. Yes, we had Playmobil the Movie, we had Ugly Dolls, but we also had Arctic Dogs, which is an awful, cheaply made animated film with some great cast members, such as Jeremy Renner and John Cleese, but they are utilized in just terrible ways. This movie is not funny at all. It is bland, ugly, and feels just very cheap. It feels like one of those animated films that you see, like, that I Hate Everything talks about, such as the Disney knockoff movies. This is a terrible, terrible animated film, and that's why it's here on the list. At number 8, we have I Spit on Your Grave, Deja Vu. Now, I am a huge fan of the original I Spit on Your Grave. I think it is a very powerful film that is definitely hard to watch and not for everybody. It is an exploitation film through and through, but what was interesting about this film was it was a sequel directed by the original director, and how did this movie end up as awful as it was? This film is 2.5 hours of awfulness. It's terrible, guys, and it's just ugly to look at. It is one of the worst looking films I have seen this year. It's so cheap looking, and it makes you feel absolutely dirty, and I don't like feeling dirty while watching a film. In fact, this movie just has none of what made the original a pretty compelling film. It's just disgusting and boring, and it feels like I'm watching a porn parody of the original film. That's how bad it is. At number 7, we have Jacob's Ladder, one of the worst remakes I have ever seen in my entire life. I am a huge fan of the original film from the 90s. I think that is one of my favorite psychological horror films of all time. And this film, though it does some things different, It is poorly executed with terrible CGI, terrible acting, terrible direction. This was an awful film. I hated every second of it. Changes that it made to the original film, I welcomed, but they were poorly executed, and the film was just laugh out loud, kind of hilarious at times. It was awful. At number 6, we have After, which is the 2019 version of 50 Shades of Grey for PG-13 little kiddies, and it is awful, guys. Terrible, terrible acting, terrible writing. This movie is straight up pretentious with its dialogue, especially when the main guy of the film is just saying this very preachy dialogue that has nothing to it. There is nothing about this movie that is remotely enjoyable. It's awful, guys. Like, I hate that this movie is getting a sequel. Like, because it means I'm gonna have to watch it. I mean, I watched this one, I have to watch the other one. This is a terrible film. At number 5, we have The Hustle, one of the worst comedies of the year, with two great talents. Rebel Wilson and Anne Hathaway are two great actors. When you give them the right material, they can be funny too. I've seen Rebel Wilson be funny, and Rebel Wilson gets a lot of flack, but she deserves it for this film because there is nothing about her or Anne Hathaway that is likable. The movie is not funny. It is just a chore to sit through, and I had to watch this movie twice just to make sure that I hated it as much as I did, and I absolutely hated it. This is a terrible comedy, one of the worst comedies I have ever seen, and that's why it's this high on the list. At number 4, we have yet another terrible comedy, Loqueesha, and this film is just so bizarre and has so many things that are miscalculated. First off, it's written, directed, and starring the same guy, and it's all based on a joke that this guy really thinks that he can do a really good sassy black woman voice, and it ends up just feeling wrong and racist and not as funny as the movie thinks it is. It is a very cheap looking film. In fact, probably out of all the films on this top 10 list, it is probably, technically, by all accounts, probably the worst film on this list. But I mean, I had some guilty pleasureness with it. It is a terrible film, but the ones that came after it, the ones that are higher on this list, are even worse. And speaking of worse, at number 3, we have Playing with Fire, from the director of the great, the magnificent Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. And this movie, though not as bad, is pretty terrible. John Cena, I love you, man. You are a really good comedian. Like, there are moments where you are absolutely funny in films and on TV and all that. You are not funny in this film. The material you are given is trash. This film was awful. I hate comedies that are directed towards kids and families because, to me, those are the worst type of comedies, especially when they're done horribly like this film. It is not funny at all. It is a waste of time. This was terrible. At number 2, we have Unplanned. Pureflix, what are you doing? Like, I mean, I thought God's Not Dead 3 was alright, and I thought you were on your way to doing something better with your time. But sadly, no. This is a terrible film, and not only is it a terrible film, it is also a lie. Now, I'm not going to get in a big debate on abortion or anything. That's not what this channel is about. But if you are straight up lying through your teeth through a film, that is awful, and it just makes me disrespect you even more. I hated this film. The acting was terrible, the directing was terrible, and the fact that it was just a straight up lie just brought a horrible taste in my mouth. This is a very irresponsible film that should be thrown in the trash. And my number one worst film of 2019 is The Haunting of Sharon Tate. Now, for some people that know me, this came as no surprise, probably. I absolutely hated this film to no end. It is disgusting. It is deplorable. It is disrespectful, dirty, and vile. I hated this film to no end, and just thinking about it makes it worse and worse. Now, you can do a alternate history type movie and make it work. There was a film that came out this year that did that exact same thing, such as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which almost has kind of the same subject matter with Sharon Tate, but this film is just so disrespectful to her, to the people that died. It is vile and awful, and it is just a combination of a lot of things in the films that I put on my top 10 list that I absolutely hated. It was just, it's the worst film I have seen. It is one of the worst films I have ever seen in my entire life. I hated this film. I want to send it straight to hell. I want to burn it. It should not exist. And sadly, the director of this movie is coming out with another film about Nicole Brown Simpson. And not looking forward to it, but I'm gonna have to eventually watch that. This movie was trash, guys. And that, guys, is my top 10 worst films of 2019. I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe some of my films ended up on your worst list, or maybe I talked about films that you didn't put on your list. But overall, this is personally what I thought was the worst films of 2019. There's probably some that I left off this list, because there was a couple other films that I absolutely hated, but this was it, guys. These films were awful. But thankfully, that is all behind us now, and we can talk about the best films of 2019, or my favorite films of 2019. And that video is going to be a little delayed. I still have a few movies that I want to watch. Hopefully they will end up on my best list for the end of the year, but we'll wait and see. So thank you guys for watching this video, me just rambling on the camera. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.